Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Development Insights podcast, where we bring you ideas, experiences, and best practices from the real estate development industry. My name is McCallum, and I'm your host here. My guest for this episode is Matt Bolen. Matt is an architect and he's a director at McCallum Sather. Matt has a very long CV and resume, and I think he refers to it on the podcast as well, that is, at least for the past 10-15 years, he's been very focused on innovative construction methods, designing buildings which are in line with our current needs, which is sustainability to deal with climate crisis and its effects, and also affordability and housing crisis. And he has been some sort of a pioneer. I know I came across his work a couple of years ago when the code changes first happened in Ontario, allowing more use of mass timber in residential, especially mid-rise buildings. When I was looking for people who are working in the industry who know, and so I can go and learn from them, definitely his name was one of the names that kept coming up. We have had the opportunity to meet finally and have a conversation, a lot of mutual friends and colleagues in between us. In this particular episode, Matt walks us through his definition and his vision of what a sustainable design is, how to incorporate it into your next projects, and what are some of the maybe low-hanging fruit, if you may. He walks us through his experience in dealings with mass timber as a new way of doing things, at least a newer way of doing things in the mid-rise building sections, the lessons learned, and how between mass timber, the modular products or the volumetric modular products and technologies, prefabrication in construction, and how we can use all of them to basically try and put a dent into this housing crisis, affordability crisis. He also talks about the learning curve that is included or is part of this journey when you're introducing new systems to your building, how to optimize it, and the importance of having the right team on board, the importance of having the right team that is willing to work with you on these new systems and using them as another tool in your toolbox, and how you can actually benefit from the repeatability of the particular system. As always, you can find more information about our guest, this episode, and what they do on our website, realestatedevelopmentinsights.com, realestatedevelopmentinsights.com. That's all one phrase. And I hope you enjoy listening to this episode. Please remember to subscribe to the show, and even better, please tell others about it. Help us grow the show and get the word out. Thank you very much. Hey, Matt. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. Very much appreciate your time. I don't know if you know the story, but I heard of you and your work about 2 years and a little bit more probably. And that was the first time that I started researching mass timber and trying to figure out who's doing work in the mass timber area. And your name keep popping up. You had done some work back then. And I know you've been very busy. You've had multiple projects. You guys have done pioneering work in that area. And I'm glad to report that 2 years later, I've had the pleasure of working on a few mass timber projects, and we have one in the ground, which is very exciting right now. With that being said, with that little background, I will ask you to introduce yourself to our audience, give you a little bit more information about yourself, what you've done, where you come from, and I guess we go from there.
Sounds great. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invite and the kind words to start off. My name is Matt Bolen. I'm an architect based primarily in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, so southwestern Ontario. Very, very fortunate to, over the last, I'd say 10 to 15 years, really had an interest and a passion for both mass timber and this new innovative building technology, but also housing and just how we can find innovative solutions for construction to help solve or work towards solving the housing crisis that we face and so many others face, and how we can do that across the entire continuum of need. And one of the big ways we feel that that's going to be possible is through prefabricated methods. And so we've found there's a real nice synergy between the innovation, the low carbon nature of mass timber construction and that prefabricated housing push. And so really my work and our firm's work over that time has really focused and honed in on that, and just trying to be advocates and leaders in that space, and building and connecting as many different people as we can, whether that be other architects, constructors, developers, fabricators, other consultants like ourselves. And so yeah, it's been a fun ride as we've worked through it, and meeting people like yourself along the way has also been a really rewarding part of the journey. So again, happy to be here.
Pretty good. Thank you. Okay, so with that being said, thank you for the introduction. I want to start with, you touched on multiple topics. There's the carbon footprint, there's the embodied carbon, there's the sustainability, there's design, there's fabrication. There's a lot you and I can talk about for the next probably few hours. But let's talk about sustainability. Like, what is sustainability from your perspective? How do you, like, there's obviously technical definitions for it, in terms of material, but you as an architect who's been, like you mentioned, working in this area or arena around sustainable projects, what is sustainable design? Not necessarily the material. What is sustainable design? If you're thinking about, I want to build a new building, we want to make sure we are sustainable as possible. Define that a little bit for us, because I think there's a lot of hype out there. There's a lot of also technical verbiage around it. Maybe our average or non-technical person has a hard time wrapping their head around it. Do I go fully silver bullet, mass timber, everything? Can I find somewhere in between? Walk us through that, please.
Sure. Well, it's a broad topic, as you say, and there's lots of opinions on it. Unfortunately, it's become a bit of a politicized issue these days in terms of environmentalism, climate change, and this word sustainability that gets connected to those ideas and those concepts. Of course, it's not new. It's, since the 70s and maybe even before, 1970s and before, environmentalism and some of these things have been pushed in I'll call it the North American culture. But what's been really interesting and through a lot of the education that I've been through over the last, even 5 and 10 years has been, specifically 5 years, I would say, has been that this is not at all, a 70s. This is much, much longer than that. If you start to look at sustainability through the lens of indigeneity and respecting the earth and those sorts of ideas and philosophies, this is much, much older than that and has been done, for generations and generations. And I think that's what I'm ultimately trying to get back to, is this idea of really respecting the earth and all the people and things on it. And that's a very broad concept, and it's hard to then filter that down into the very technical aspects of what we do in our profession. But I do think it's great to start off with some larger mission and larger vision statement about what's really driving you to do the work that you do and make decisions and align with the people you want to do it with. So in a more, as we start to sort of granular down to, well, what is sustainability for us in our work, it really comes to, I had this great experience it was about 10 years ago it was actually a professor of mine who's a really well-known building science guru, engineer named John Straub in this part of the world. And I think pretty well known across North America. And I was sitting down saying, I want to push on sustainability in the projects. I don't feel like I'm doing enough in terms of benefiting, the world and the built and natural environment through the work that I'm doing. What should I do? I was looking at Passive House at the time. And he told me, it's a great building science education and building performance education. Just beware of the dogma. And then, that was a good lesson. And I think I've taken that in most ways, in all the different tools and methods and materials or certifications that get tied to sustainability. I think now I'm looking at it through a much more holistic lens of trying to find the right tool for the right project and the right objective. And what I like about that is when you talk about sustainability, most people or a lot of people will think about environmental sustainability. But I really like this idea that sustainability it can be more than that. And we don't want to have, as a profession or as people who are ultimately concerned about the world and climate change, just be screaming into the void about all the bad things we're doing. I like the idea of actually taking action and figuring out how to execute these things that we're doing. And when you start to look at things as the overall sustainability, that can actually tie to, well, what is the sustainability or viability of doing a given measure on a given project? And that's complicated. especially in buildings with different clients who have different needs and different users and different, pro forma financial metrics for what guides their decision making. It's really important for us, I think, to build out a set of tools, and those tools that can be doing things in a sustainable way, looking at things holistically, but yet making sure that the tools that we're using on a given project fit and allow us to actually, execute on those things to the highest possible level of sustainability possible. So that's my operating current idea of what sustainability is.
I love that response, because first of all, it gives me a lot to work with here. So second of all, it goes very closely to what we try to promote on our website, on our podcast. We're about, I'm a very pragmatic person. I like practical stuff. I like great ideas out there, great theories out there, but what can I do tomorrow morning? I'm on a job site. I have a project. I'm literally going through a new project proposal right now. What are the things that I can take away? And if I were to push you and I ask you and say, you've been working on this topic for a long time. I have a new project going on right now. I'm probably going to do it in concrete because I'm used to it and I've done it in the past. Can you give me a couple, maybe 2 or 3 low-hanging fruits as a designer, as an architect, as someone who's worked with these systems? Give me a couple of ideas and say, listen, okay, you can't use mass timber. Maybe you can not use this. You still need to use concrete, but give us a couple of pointers. What should I look for?
It's a great question. And again, lots of alignment between us then, and in terms of how we think about things clearly. People in our offices here probably get sick of hearing me say it, but I'm constantly saying that we need to understand conventional design and construction, and within that understanding, look for opportunities where innovation and sustainability can solve conventional problems. That, to me, so far, has been the way that we've been able to do it. Again, if you come off as just screaming into the void, I'll say, or coming into the room maybe with naive or uninformed, really cool concepts or really sustainable concepts, it's hard to actually have them get traction. So if you can understand deeply which does take time, of course, and a lot of experience to understand those conventional systems and conventional delivery and conventional design and why they are being done, you can start to look for the holes and look for and through communication, talking to the people that are doing those conventional things, understand, well, what are their pain points? Where are the things that actually aren't working out that well for you? Because oftentimes what I've found in that conventional industry, if you try to push them into something that is just pushing them out of their comfort zone, they're much less likely to buy into it. Versus if you can say, hey, by the way, that thing that's already causing you problems and causing your team problems? We actually have a solution for that. So to your question specifically, that's where mass timber, for me right now, is a really effective solution to mid-rise construction. So mid-rise construction, or as some people like to call it, that missing middle housing, when you go to travel through Europe and you see this 4 to 6 story, really comfortable massing that feels normal, versus going to North American suburbia with McMansions and housing spread out, or into very urban dense conditions with towers that some people, again, just find a little inhumane and uncomfortable. That missing middle is that piece that most people would agree is what we need more of. And yet, particularly in the North American context, it's been very, very difficult to execute and for a lot of reasons. One, and one of the big drivers is just the efficiency, the lack of economy of scale when you're doing that type of development. You still have to have all the process that goes into it, all of the elevators and stairs and fire ratings and all these different things that you have to do on the very big projects with lots of economy of scale, and that you don't need to have on the small single family type of projects. So right there, that became this target of, okay, well, what can we do in the conventional delivery of those types of projects to make it easier? And what we found is those two groups that were either the groups that were building and developing the low rise versus the groups that were building and developing the high rise, neither of them were that effective at doing the mid rise. It was a little clunky because they couldn't seem to pull together the best of both in terms of cost and speed and all these things. So mass timber got introduced. The mass timber is essentially mass panelized compressed wood, small growth wood. So it's very sustainable to get out of the forest. You're not cutting down old trees, cutting down new trees, very sustainable forestry practices, and comes together and it gets compressed either through gluing or nailing or doweling them together into these very large panels. And these panels, actually similar to a big log on a campfire that won't burn if you try to light it, have that same property against fire. They are able to just char on the outside but not burn through, and therefore are able to achieve the same type of fire ratings that you require in that high-rise type construction, but they're able to do so. And that versus using what they would call stick frame wood, so dimension lumber just spread out and having cavities between it, that actually is very much harder to achieve fire ratings out of. So in our experience, as we've been working with the conventional delivery of mid-rise construction, we found that even in talking to framers and talking to people about how you could expedite the construction, which of course reduced costs, how you could make it more attractive through, exposing the ceilings of this beautiful mass timber product, that the actual mass timber solves a bunch of problems to that mid-rise space. It allows them to go faster. It allows it to be built at a comparable price to anything else, and also creates an aesthetic benefit on the inside, all while, being a product that is compatible with the type of trades that are coming from the single family world in terms of being familiar and comfortable with wood, that they're able to just plug in there and be quite effective. So that's an example, I would say at least one example of where mass timber that tool solves a very specific problem in a very specific area. And now there's lots of course, applications outside of it, but we've found that, for example, mass timber in single-family homes, we get asked about that sometimes. We don't do a lot of single-family homes. It doesn't necessarily solve the same problem. It definitely provides the aesthetic benefit and can do a lot of interesting things. But because on that mid-rise, we're always having that horizontal break between units, that horizontal separation, that's a pain point in the conventional delivery of mid-rise that hadn't really been solved in an effective way, and mass timber solves it. So not only are you getting the aesthetic and the biophilic, that sense of warmth and well-being of being in a nice timber space, but also you're solving a very logistical challenge that those types of projects have. And again, you don't have to solve that problem on the single family because the same fire ratings aren't required. And then also moving up into the high rise, there's some really exciting and interesting initiatives on how that same product can be used in those high rise developments. But those ones don't quite have the same challenge. So we're harder to break into that because there's more comfort in, again, doing cast in place concrete on those, or, down in the States, they often use a lot of more steel. Very well understood. They know how to go fast with their slip forms and all the things that they do. So they're less likely to take on and use this system because it's not necessarily solving a problem to them. And that's again been one of our big drivers, is look for the problems in the conventional delivery.
Hey everyone, Payam here. Just a quick announcement before we go back to the rest of the interview. We have been working on something new at midrise.ca. For those of you who have followed my work throughout the years, you know that I'm very passionate about the mid-rise buildings and the part that they can play in solving our housing crisis issues in Toronto and Canada. And I've had the good fortune and opportunity of working on a number of different mid-rise buildings and study a whole bunch of different systems that work for these buildings, the pros and cons of each system, how they affect the schedule, how they affect the cost, how they affect the performance of each building, and what stages they need to kick in. We have started a new webinar series. It's called Mid-Rise Building Solutions, And we plan to present and review some of the systems that hold the most promise for the mid-rise building typology in each webinar. If you want to learn more, these are all free resources. Please go to our website, midrise.ca. That's mid-rise.ca. And again, thank you for your support. Amen. We definitely are on the same page on that front. And you touched on a whole bunch of different things, so you have to bear with me because I want to go back and recap a few of them. One of the things that I think I've also heard you say, and I've been also talking about it, and we've had a couple episodes before about this, is that the construction industry, the development industry, it's the story of the old dog and a new trick. And even for myself personally, for the longest time, I thought that was a very bad thing. We should be learning new tricks as we go much faster. But as I have gathered more experience in the industry, I'm actually a believer that this lag on the industry side is not necessarily a bad thing. Things that we do take time. They will take time for people in the industry to catch up, to learn, to feel comfortable with, and to debug. Because basically, once we build a building, it will be there forever. We're not writing another code for another update on your iOS, which updates every few weeks. We're building a building to be there for hopefully 100 years or more. And with that said, I want to go back to the point you made about transitioning. And that's very important because I think on the overall scale, if we look at it, and if our listeners have listened to a previous episode we had with Madamy, one of the executives from Madamy Homes, which is a pretty large company in Canada, he even explained to us that why they are shifting their focus from low-rise single-family housing and subdivision projects to mid-rise section, because and I keep hearing that all day, every day, pretty much, that the whole industry, the whole country, our society is transitioning, and perhaps it's evolving from going one type of living lifestyle to another type. And this has been happening for as long as we've lived, different shapes and formats, obviously. So the whole mid-rise section, definitely very important. I totally agree with you that the good thing about the mid-rise section, as you pointed out, and I totally agree with, is that it lends itself to being a great playground for new systems, for mixing of new systems, and trying to educate more people. It's really hard great point there. It's really hard to compete with stick framing on a single family dwelling, on a custom house. It's very hard. Unless you're going there for a very super expensive structure, it's really hard to compete with that. And I would also go on the other side and say, I think it's very hard to compete with CIP if you go on a 14, 15, 20-story building, at least at this point in time. And this middle ground is good for us to try. And to your point, mass timber lends itself to being that product potentially that is helping the whole thing. And I want to go through the mass timber a little bit more, and I'm just going to open a bracket for those of our audience who are listening, who are interested. There's an episode with Phil Silverstein from Mario Monteshima Architects. He did a very good job at walking us through George Brown College project, and I think Simon Edwards did one on acoustics of mass timber building. So in brackets, what is the biggest challenge today that you think we need to focus on as an industry when it comes to building mass timber buildings?
It's a good question. And I believe that the answer is prefabrication and kit of part based design. And I've had a lot of great mentors, teachers, and collaborators over the years. One specifically was actually, I worked with, who was an architect, David Warren, in the volumetric modular space. So we did some work on basically steel chassis that go down and something like think automotive industry for buildings. And we sort of worked with him and Greg Latimer and Zen Modular and a few others on some volumetric projects and designs where you really had to understand these chassis in volumetric spaces that then you build out and then get delivered to site. And there was a great conversation that happened, and David mentioned that if you look at the construction industry 100 years ago, if you were building a house, you weren't putting in an order for your windows like you do today. You were getting glass and wood, and you would literally be putting that together. I grew up on a family farm in southwestern Ontario where the barn and the house were all made on site. The barn boards would go from 4 inches to 12 inches because they were all made with the wood from on site. And that's great. And there's like a lot of the great nostalgia with that. But the same way that you'd be seen as crazy for trying to frame together your own windows on a job site today, and that the performance of those windows would just be abysmal, I think we need to start moving the industry in that direction more and more. And I think we have stalled out a little bit over the last few decades on that, and there's for no good reason. I think I take a lot of the shoulder of the brunt of the blame for that from the design side of the industry, because I think we could be doing a much better job at thinking about our designs and actually creating repetitive designs in the sense of using the same components again and again and again, and then refining and building those components to be high performing, adaptable to different sites and different environments, but also able to accommodate different looks and represent the community they're in and the client they're for and all of these different things, but still with that same prefabricated element. What we've found in the volumetric space, that's almost jumping a little bit too far ahead. And there's also so many logistical challenges with volumetric modular design where you're shipping a lot of air, which becomes a major logistics challenge when you're installing it. There's also workforce related challenges, especially if you're shipping it to, remote communities. All of a sudden, yes, you have these great finished boxes that if everything goes well, you have a foundation one day and a full building the next, but then the community has no connection to it, no ability to work and help fabricate and assemble that. So balancing all these forces, understanding, okay, yes, we have a skilled labor workforce that is, of course, as most of us know, is shrinking. We're losing a lot of those really, really experienced trades, but we still are going to have a lot of people who need to, contribute to the communities they live in. And construction is such a great way for them to do that. I think for us as designers, and with, I think, a lot of maybe investment, both private and public, into fabrication and the prefabrication of building components, I think that's going to see a huge, huge payoff in terms of the quality of the work we're doing. Like I said, the windows from 100 years ago versus the triple pane passive house windows today, there's a big difference there. I think we can do the same thing across our entire built delivery model, but do it in a way that doesn't cut out people from the actual process, and instead it just helps them and helps everyone start to assemble this more in a kit of parts. I mean, it's not great because it does have stigma attached to it, but for a lot of us, I mean, our kids, when you start talking about Lego and IKEA and some of these models that have done a good job of that kit of part based approach, that, working with things and figuring out how they go together easy and clean and just work. I think that is, without question, the biggest opportunity. And it's where I think, again, from myself in the design community, where we need to be putting a lot of attention. It's good because there's a lot of really great people in the design community. I mean, you mentioned Phil, who I was with last week at the Mass Timber Conference in Portland, and many others there. This is starting to get, I think, a lot of traction, and we're seeing it. When it comes to mass timber related to that prefabrication, it's just one of the best possible products you could use for it. It's lightweight, it's low carbon, meaning that it's sequestering carbon. It's incredibly easy to use on site. I mean, if you have a screw gun and some long screws, like, it's the type of thing that it just makes so much sense. And it's such a robust product, but also has all these other benefits: aesthetic, lightweight, durable, like they're trees. I mean, trees are all around us, and they're these amazing machines that we use for so many different things in our daily lives. The fact that they can also become these great elements and tools and products that we use in our buildings over the long term, that is, I mean, to me, that's the obvious opportunity. The only maybe that's one, as the prefabrication using mass timber. The only maybe second piece to that would be, if we are able to do that and able to push on that, then I think it also, something we're also really interested in is the idea of design for disassembly. And I think you mentioned even earlier in this talk, the idea that our buildings, can be around for a long time. And I think too much the North American culture has been thinking about, well, everything, but specifically our buildings as disposable. Well, yeah, put it up for 20 years, big box store here, house here, whatever, and we'll just knock it down and throw it to the landfill and start again. This idea that if we can develop this kit of parts to be very, really about quality, but also about the ability to be adaptable and reusable, then those components can start to get taken and repurposed, either within the same building or disassembled and used in other buildings. And that's where I think we're really going to see a whole other jump up in terms of our effectiveness as a construction industry.
You touched on a couple of points there that I want to go back to. One is Phil. I think he mentioned even on the podcast that they are working on a kit of parts model for schools with mass timber, which
Correct.
is a very interesting setup. I haven't talked to him to see where they are recently, but that was probably 6 months ago. So that's definitely exciting. I would personally be very interested in doing that and learning more about that. And I want to go back to something you said, that sometimes it seems like some of the things we do kind of go a little bit too fast, too much. The modular space that you named Z Modular, I had the pleasure of visiting their plant back in, 2018, 2019, when they were originally setting things up. I was very optimistic on their system. Like when I remember I went through the whole thing, we spent quite a bit of time trying to understand how things work and where to use it, because bottom line is that you have to be able to use it and make sense of it on a paper for numbers for that product or for that system to actually be beneficial to the society as a whole. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on that. But before I go there, I want to go back to the idea of going too much too fast. It's a good thing that we're using mass timber. It's a good thing that we're pushing for it. But at the same time, I've had the extremely good opportunity and fortune of working on a very advanced mass timber system, which is one of a kind, for the past 2 years in a pre-designed system. And it has been hard, Matt. It has been hard. Like, everything has been hard. Like, there's not been a day that we've gone through this process and every detail that comes up, it's a new detail. You have to invent a new typical detail. We have a very committed client. We have very committed team. We have everyone on this team, which is probably 30 people on the team working together. It's been hard. And I'm bringing that up because I think it's important for people who choose to go through this route to be prepared for that. If you have a project that is barely working and you need to make cents on a dollar to pass the finish line, maybe don't go mass timber yet. At least that's my 2 cents. I'll wait to hear what you think. But if you have the backing, if you have the will, if you have the capacity to make it through, definitely the pioneers are going to get some rewards for being the first ones and learning and leading the pack. I'm wondering what do you think about that?
Well, I think it should be noted that it's not easy. That and anything new and innovative is not going to be easy to do. That's and someone, I think a friend of mine recently, and it wasn't even related to construction, sent me it was a JFK video on going to the moon, and that we should do it not because it's easy, but because it's hard.
Right.
And I don't know if that really applies to this or not, but I actually would go back to what I was mentioning about looking for the solutions to conventional problems. So again, if you have the opportunity to do something, whether it be for R&D or a client that just really, really wants it, great. And I'm speaking now specifically in terms of mass timber. But I would say that, we've, over the last 10 years specifically, really shown an interest in mass timber. And we've talked about that, and we've built a network of like-minded people and people in the industry, fabricators and all these people. We've been flogging that for 10 years. The first 5, there was 0 projects. There was a couple that got close because there was people who maybe got a little bit interested, but ultimately they all fell through for one reason or another. One of the first sort of talking of events I did a few years ago, might have even been when I first even came on your radar, would have been talking about our experience in essentially not executing mass timber, and how that experience on multiple projects where it didn't work, or didn't pencil, or the circumstances just didn't pan out, led to the one where it worked. I think that's one key is doing that, but there's two sides to it. I mean, you mentioned and I know we'll get into the volumetric. I want to be clear, not because I'm trying to, not appease everyone, but I actually think the people who are doing volumetric modular, that's not a blanket statement that I think volumetric modular is inherently bad. It's almost more like, at least in my lens of where I see a big focus needing to be, particularly again in that housing type of space, or some of those other typologies that are really tied to communities. I just think that the prefabrication just makes more sense right now, where we're currently at in time. Probably lots of good examples of where a volumetric solution maybe does actually work and does make a lot of sense, and it obviously has clear advantages. And to that end, I think the idea that people are pushing on the really innovative side of things, either with some sort of industry, again, private industry backing or publicly funded initiative. Brock Commons is a great example of an 18-story mass timber high-rise building that got built, 10 years ago? Same with, some of the great work that Ellis Dawn and Dialogue did with their 100-story tower. I mean, they'll be the first to tell you that whether a 100-story tower actually makes sense or is feasible or is the right thing to do right now, the idea of pushing it out there into the industry as like for inspiration, almost that avant-garde piece, is still really important because it creates that aspiration of what we can attain. A lot of projects that we toured in Portland, if anyone's ever been through the TRCA building, which is this just wild mass timber thing. I mean, these are all great aspirational projects that if you talk to people involved, it sounds like, same with your project, they're very difficult and challenging in a lot of cases, and maybe even frustrating for some involved, because maybe for some involved, they're not thinking that this is solving a conventional problem. They're thinking it's creating new problems and creating new expense that otherwise wouldn't be there if we just did it conventionally. So I totally agree with you that if you have a project that is really tight and the team that's involved doesn't have the comfort or hasn't spent that time and energy getting familiar with not only the systems and the tools, but the actual people, people build buildings, more so than the actual tools, right? So I think that aspect is so important to have your head around, is like, yes, if the budget barely works and the mass timber doesn't significantly help it, either in terms of speed or some other thing, and you don't have that experience and that real energy there in the team to push it, it's going to be very challenging. And maybe in those cases, maybe not the right fit. That being said, I know for yourself on your project, that's not the case, because I know you do have the energy and you're going to push through it and you're going to get it on the other side. And whether or not everything's perfect or not is completely irrelevant. The fact is, you're going to have that in your belt. The next time you're going to have that experience, it's why for us, we say that we don't consider ourselves designers who just want to put out vaporware on the internet, fancy renderings or have websites and all of this stuff. Our truest currency, even over and above our fees, we do have to get paid our fees just to make a living, of course, but our truest currency is built projects. You get so much more from a built project than anything else. And if we have built now several mass timber projects that with clients who would never have agreed to do it, or with clients that have specifically sought us out, particularly in the public sector, not for profits, who have come through and seen, that first one we did and realized it's exactly what they want. And when we are able to describe to them our delivery model of how it does, it just checks, boom, it goes. If we were to go and just talk to those groups, it wouldn't have the same effect. Getting into a building and having people see it, touch it, in the case of wood, even smell it, it really goes so far, even if it's things that, wouldn't do that on the next one, right? Like, it's that feedback loop is absolutely critical for the industry and for all of us. And I think the other thing too is we've often talked about design and the design process as, imagining a 747 or imagine a Boeing plane and thinking about the design hours that went into that. or even thinking about, a widget, a phone or something like that, and thinking about the design hours that go into that, and in the thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of design hours. And then once they get it right, then they start to replicate it, right? You have to get that prototyping right, and then you start to replicate. And that's something that construction industry isn't typically known for, but it is something that we're trying to figure out how we could do. And what's great about it, it seems daunting because it's, we're swimming against the grain of how things work. But if you can, again, just more so keep your eyes open for the opportunity and the aligned project partners, members who have the same interests, you can usually find the opportunities. We have a good example of that right now with a project. We were doing a project in an infill location. It was a multi-unit, sort of multi-stack of buildings on the corner of this, up and coming neighborhood that was, wartime housing and looking for a bit of a boost and densification. And so we had a site, it was in for zoning approvals. And we had come up with design and talked to the client and talked to the group involved about how we were going to use this as a panelized, prefabricated solution that could all show up to site and click together with a hybrid of mass timber and stick frame. Sort of worked. Well, 6 months into that process, that same client was driving around and realized that a house 4 doors in had burnt down and was up for sale on literally a fire sale, where he was able to pick it up for very, very, very cheap. And so what we immediately realized is that based on the new zoning that had come down from the city, and streamed down from the federal government through provincial, allowing 4 units on a single lot, we immediately were able to take a prototype of one of our stacks that was going on the other development and build it on a fast track timeline with no planning approvals on this site. Now, again, there was definitely times when we scratched our head and said, oh man, why are we doing this? This is painful, because it was new and it was different and it still took people to wrap their head around it. But as a prototyping exercise, just based solely on keeping your eyes open for the opportunity to push forward with the concepts and the ideas, that's been a really exciting thing. And not even because it was something that we pushed, it was something that through the collaboration and connection and communication with a client in that case, that they were able to identify it and then bring it back to us as a team to work on the execution and that design prototyping almost, but in real time and with a real executed project.
That's a very good example of what could be achieved. And personally, for the past almost 10 years now, I've been pursuing, it has been my personal goal to see if I can establish 2 or 3 building types and technologies for, per se, infill mid-rise buildings, because that I sincerely believe that there's going to be huge need and market segment for that. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to work with probably, I don't know, maybe around half a dozen or more different system types combined together and hybrids, and try to debug, I would like to say, each of them and kind of figure out, okay, this system is good if you have a corner lot, this system is better if you have a middle lot, and trying to do that. And I think going back to what we were discussing, that idea with the stackability and repeatability principle will kind of work together. And one of the things I've been learning is that you also don't need to fall in love with one particular system or method or material as much as you get comfortable with it, but you don't need, there are potentials for crisscross and just miss and match and just mix things up a little bit, because sometimes it actually helps to have a steel beam in the middle of a mass timber buildings per se, or vice versa, just to make sure that something gets achieved and it doesn't need to be exactly 100% one way or another way. So that's good. And I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to go through the hypotheticals a little bit. We have a question in this podcast. We ask our guests that if we were to give you a magic wand, I don't know if you like magic or not, but let's assume you do. If we were to give you a magic wand and say, Matt, for a day, you could change one law, one regulation, one guideline, one mindset, one way of doing things in the industry, take your pick. What would you change right now that would overall help us as an industry, as a society, to solve housing problem, solve the I don't know, climate crisis, solve the affordability. Which one? Like pick one or two. Like that would be great.
Oh, that's a tough one. Okay, so I think I have a really easy one that maybe is a little bit of a cheat, and then maybe I can think while I'm reviewing that one. Maybe I'll think of something a little more ambitious, because obviously, if you've got that magic wand, I don't know
You
how
want
to
to
do
use
that.
it well.
You want to use it well, yeah. The first one, which might be a bit of a lame use of the magic wand. Maybe I need to think more bigger or more ambitiously. I would say the permission of single stair exits in this country. And I know that technically BC has permitted it. However, my understanding also is that there's still checks and balances with fire prevention that is making it difficult to actually execute, even out in BC. Conrad Speckert, who you probably know, you should probably have on here because he'd be great if he hasn't been already. Obviously, Jack Keys, who introduced us, as close ties as well. We've all been part of Conrad's drive to push single stair exits. And what's funny about that is that originally, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or more, came to me with it, to a bunch of architects with the concept, and I actually shot it down. Apparently, it was me and some old crusty guy that didn't like the idea of it, which is funny because it speaks to, preconceived notions of what's the right thing to do and what's not, and buying into whatever you think is the thing. As you say, being flexible and open to, oh, maybe I need to shift my ideas and paradigms on what is the right way, and not being focused on dogma or what is conventional or what's being done, but sort of just being open to it. The single stair thing, we've now, after I've studied it, after I've started to look at our typologies that we have and the dramatic efficiencies you can see, and this is sort of me as a dorky designer, but the ability to not only create building efficiencies that I know make the go no go on projects much more viable from a financial standpoint, but also just the sense of community that you can get out of those now singular circulation spaces, to me could create such a major impact. And similarly to what I was saying before about the work we've done and people being able to get into those buildings and then realize that this is what they want and doing it, I had a very similar experience last year when I was fortunate enough to travel to Europe and specifically to Scandinavia and was able to visit. I mean, I went there to visit and see a whole bunch of stuff, but I specifically was able to visit a friend living with his wife and 3 kids in a place called Nordhaven in Copenhagen, which is a relatively new development. And they were living in a 6-story, essentially walk up. It did have an elevator, so it had full accessibility. But it's what exactly we're talking about. It's a single stair grouping and clustering of buildings with 3 or 4 units per floor, and it allows for it's not just similar to mass timber. It's not just about one thing. It's the fact that it creates a more efficient building layout, more usable versus common area. It has again be shown clearly through fire exiting models and all kinds of really detailed information that from a life safety standpoint, it has and in fact, even in some ways it might be better at the right scale and the right design layout with the right limitations and systems put into that building. But also, again, it's got that added benefit, similar to mass timber, where you get all these logistics things or all these things that it can benefit your speed and efficiency and pro forma. But it also then creates these amazing community hubs where you actually see your neighbor because you're coming out. And if you're on, depending on what floor you're on, you're likely going to take that central stair down and out through your space. And then that starts to drive the entire urban fabric because we're actually designing for that within the buildings, within our building typologies that are still repeatable, that are still based on kit of part design and standardized elements that can be refined and adapted to a given place. That's the one that, to me, from a non-believer to a believer, we still have these barriers that hopefully, we've seen some really amazing things in terms of government-driven, initiated approval that I hope will continue regardless of where the political situation goes. I do hope that at the very least, there is this push towards let's open in a responsible way, but let's trust our consultant and construction design and construction community to do what they need to do. We're liable and responsible for it anyways. Let's take that restriction off, and I would say specifically that one I think would be really cool.
And that's
I am an
I would
optimist,
say
so I hope it'll happen.
I would say that's not a frivolous one. That's actually a very effective one because it would, like you mentioned, it has trickle effect. I know of unfortunately, I know of multiple projects that, especially when you're in my niche, where you're working on infill mid-rise projects, where every square foot counts for you to be able to gain efficiency in the building. There are projects that could be a go or no go just because of a single staircase or two stair, or in most common cases right now is the scissor stairs, where you still lose a decent chunk of efficiency per floor, and you have to do. And to your point, we have been seeing a lot of good progress in terms of easing up some regulations, allowing the industry to breathe a little bit per se in terms of what they can build. And I think it was Mike Zaversnik on a few episodes ago that he was arguing that yes, incremental change is good. We definitely need it, but at the same time, beware of not becoming complacent as an industry just because we got the win. We still need more. And I want to circle it back by saying that yes, we got the major streets in Toronto. We got the whole EHON going on, but you still need to work out the staircases. You still need to work out the Type G loadings, and you still need to work out a whole bunch of different things for a format to actually pencil out. So I actually agree with your wish, and I hope that the genie, while he's working on the one that one, can also work on the Type G loading condition, because that also affects whole other types of projects. I want to go and ask you, on the flip side, in our community, as the professionals, consultants, engineers, builders, developers, what are some of the important things that you think we neglect, or mistakes that we make, or things that we don't necessarily pay attention to, which could be improved on, or it could be considered waste at this point in time? Does anything particular come to mind?
It's hard to do, but it's also a bit, maybe it's just been the week I've had, but it seemed pretty obvious, and that is the week, the year, or the couple of years I've had. But we have to absolutely start focusing more on the ultimate goal on a project. Is the ultimate goal is to build that thing, get it built. And I think too many times there's too much focus from all the groups you mentioned on the process, on making sure that all the checks and balances and things. And I appreciate, especially because I don't work on very, very large, very, very complex projects that have, massive budgets in every different, specified section and trade and whatever, and how you need to have very robust management practices in place for those types of projects. But what I'm finding and seeing is, because there's those examples of how you deliver mega P3 hospitals, infrastructure projects, what have you, too often I think a lot of the inherited process, dogma, whatever you want to call it, is getting downloaded all the way down to some of this work that, we're doing. And we need to get away from that. We need to really think a bit more with that, triage, NASA based approach of, let's put all the stuff on the table, get all the people around the table who know how to do it, and then just go do it. Not worry about as much the right set of documentation procedures or chain of command was followed to go through the right thing. I think we need to get away from that a little bit more and really start focusing on what the end goal is. And if the end goal is delivering transitional housing in a community that's struggling with huge encampment problems and safety of vulnerable citizens, that's something we have to look at and focus on. And fortunately, I think there's some really great examples, and I'm even more fortunate. I feel like I've been lucky enough to be involved in some of them where, the Rapid Housing Initiative the first version, round one, was 12 months. 12 months, not for design, not for approvals. It was 12 months from the start of the project to occupancy. And that when that got stated pretty much across the industry, that was scoffed at. It was laughed at. It's not possible. There's just no way. And even still today, I think, I mean, the program has been expanded. I think it's more like 18 months now, and things have slid at it, but it still has a lot of the good elements of it. But what that was such a fun part to be a part of is included in our case, and why we were able to be successful is because it was in the entire group was all aligned in terms of that execution, starting with the government and all the approvals authorities, all the way down to the design and consulting, and ultimately fabrication and construction. So that, to me, is where we absolutely need to be focusing ourselves more so. And I am seeing that in certain places. I just think it needs to be maybe incentivized more, or just communicated more to focus on results. And if we can do that and promote, it's about the results. And because then I think, similar to some of these strategies we're talking about, mass timber, there's like 3 or 4 or 5 totally different benefits that mass timber can offer. Prefabrication, there's 3 or 4 or 5 different benefits. Single stairs, there's 3 or 4 or 5 different benefits they can offer. The same thing is true for like executing projects with speed. And of course, I mean, there's lots of people who say, well, you need the right amount of time to do your work and all those things. And I do get that, especially from the consultant side. But if it's going to be done in a way where you have to have the right people and the right mindset to do it. But I think if we can start operating in a more collaborative, less litigious mindset on again, certain types of projects where it makes sense, and get the support for that from government and the community at large, that's where I see as something that we can be doing and focusing on more, is how do we start tracking the executed projects and the finish line and celebrating them, and really talking about that, because I don't necessarily think it is as much. I think in a lot of cases we tend to get distracted too much about, again, we call it here vaporware, the stuff, the sexy images, and especially in today's day, you don't sometimes know if it's real or not. Is that a real picture on their website? Is it? Whatever. To me, a focus on more about how did they get that done, and how long did it really take them to get that done, and having the focus on that will, I think, naturally, we've seen it. It naturally starts to take the attention away from the noisy elements and just focuses everyone in on what really matters and solving the problems that matter in the order that they need to be solved in terms of importance and urgency.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think Jonathan Diamond said it very good on this podcast a few episodes ago, that it seems like somewhere around the way we lost the overarching objective, and everyone started optimizing for different targets in the process. And at this point in time, we're optimizing for 200 different variables in the process of building a building and sometimes we just forget that we actually need to build this. Like at the end of the day, if we and I'm not talking about just the design section. I'm also talking about the municipalities and people who have a jurisdiction over different things. If you keep making things optimized in a million different ways, it will not happen. It just adds cost, it just adds time, and just defeats the whole purpose. But yeah, I could not agree more with what you just said. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to share with our audience? Any parting thoughts or final ideas?
I don't think so. No, I just really appreciate the opportunity. It's always nice to talk.
Thank you very much. We very much appreciate your time. And who knows, maybe in the next year or so, we have more updates and we do a round 2 of this conversation. And again, Thank you for your time today.
Great. Thank you.